October Sky was released in 1999 and was directed by Joe Johnston, who directed other films such as Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Jumanji, and Captain America: The First Avenger. And before he was a director, he was actually the art director for Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as the 3 original Star Wars movies. October Sky stars a young Jake Gyllenhaal in his first starring role, and as well as who would become Academy Award winners Laura Dern and Chris Cooper. This film tells the true story of Homer Hickam, a small-town kid from Colwood, West Virginia, who is destined to become a coal miner one day, who is inspired by the launch of Sputnik in the 1950s to start launching rockets of his own with his friends. He's met with disapproval from his father, who's the superintendent of the coal mining company that owns Colwood, but also is inspired by his teacher to keep going with his Rocket Boys. And inspired is the best word I know how to use for this film. Homer Hickam is someone who didn't have an approving parent in his father. He didn't have the grades. He didn't have the knowledge to do the thing that he dreamed about. However, it didn't stop him from pushing forward, learning more, and actually working toward his goal. That goal being to be an engineer for NASA one day. Right away, this is a very sentimental movie for me. I remember the first time I watched this with my 8th grade science class, and I remember aligning a lot with the main character, Homer. Homer is more of a dreamer, he thinks about doing things before he's actually thought it all the way through. He makes mistakes, but eventually he gets to where he's going. And in a lot of instances in my life, that's kind of the category that I fall into as well. Whenever I was graduating from 8th grade, my 8th grade science teacher actually gave me a copy of October Sky because he said in front of all the parents there that I reminded him of the main character from that movie, and that was a huge compliment that I've never forgotten to this day several years later. And that resulted in me ultimately reading the book several times over this movie is based on, called Rocket Boys. Watch this movie very consistently. I watch it maybe at least once a year, but probably more like twice a year. It's one of those movies where if I'm ever feeling uninspired or if I'm feeling like I'm in a rut, this is a great film to go ahead and put on and be inspired by. October Sky isn't the most well-made movie, right? It's one of those movies that has very sentimental value for me that I feel like can inspire others as well. A few weird choices, like there's a love plot that they don't really give a lot of attention to. It does one of those things where the girl that the lead is interested in really doesn't speak at all, so we don't get a lot of that build-up where we really care about that romance working out. So that was kind of an odd choice for me. If you're going to include that, go ahead and give her a few lines and actually have there be build-up, or just don't include it at all, in my opinion. And there's some cliche dialogue in here, but it doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the movie, and it's one of those things that just kind of come along with it. Best way I know how to describe this is October Sky is the perfect Sunday scary movie, where you are not looking forward to going to school or going to work on Monday and you are just dreading it. You need a little bit of inspiration. October Sky is the perfect movie just to pop on, watch. It will leave you feeling inspired to do great things for the week to come. It's really interesting to watch Jake Gyllenhaal this early in his career as well. Like I said before, it was his very first starring role. This was before Donnie Darko. This was before The Day After Tomorrow. This thing was first. It wasn't his first acting role in a film, but it was his first one where all of the attention was on him. And right away, you can see hints of the actor that he would become one day. The best example that I have is in the basement scene with his father, after Homer decides to finally commit to shooting off rockets and not working at the coal mining company. It isn't a flashy scene where Jake Gyllenhaal freaks out at all, but you really do see that reserved sort of rage within him that he would go on to use in future roles such as Nightcrawler or Stronger, whenever his character that he's playing is so passionate about something and is so pent up inside and can't express the way he feels about something, but you can see through his delivery of his dialogue with his father in that scene that he is hardline not doing what his dad wants him to do anymore, and there's nothing that he can do about it. in a way, this was the perfect first starring role for Jake Gyllenhaal, and I would like to imagine that this sort of set off the way that he would play a lot of his characters throughout the remainder of his career. So the movie isn't something that people talk about nearly enough as to the influence that it had on Jake Gyllenhaal and on his career and on the movies that he's been in. You know, who knows if we get Nightcrawler if we don't get October Sky? Who knows if in the future he ends up being Mysterio in Spider-Man if we don't get him in this movie in this specific role. Right now, I'm going to go into a light spoiler. With a movie like this that's based on a true story, I don't really think that spoilers are that big of a deal, but just so you know, if you haven't watched it yet, I'm going to put a spoiler right here at the bottom of the screen, and it'll be on the entire time I'm talking about something. If you don't want to get spoiled about something that happened, then just fast forward in the video, and that will go away as soon as I'm done talking about a couple of scenes. But I just have to talk about this. Future me, whenever you're editing this, put it there right now. I'm going to talk about Homer and his dad really quick and just how important that relationship is throughout the entirety of this movie as well as Gyllenhaal's performance. I said before, this role was very instrumental for the roles that Gyllenhaal would later have in his career to this day. And Chris Cooper was the perfect scene partner for Gyllenhaal for a lot of the scenes between Homer and his father, because the attribute that I praised Gyllenhaal for having, sort of having a reserved way of showing his rage, Chris Cooper has that as well, and I would like to think that Gyllenhaal learned a lot of that on the set of October Sky from Chris Cooper. Now, granted, Homer's dad is very upfront about his disapproval of Homer. So it's not necessarily the pent-up rage within him, but it's the pent-up pride that he isn't willing to share with Homer yet. You get throughout the movie Homer's father, who in real life was actually Homer Sr., but they renamed him John in the movie to avoid confusing the audience. Throughout the movie, John is just constantly putting Homer down. He's talking about this rocket thing. He's banning him from company property. But on the side, he's also helping him a little bit. He gave Homer some pretty critical materials there very early into the Rocket Boys. And without him doing that, it would have made Homer's journey a lot harder. So even though he doesn't, on paper, approve of what Homer's doing, and he doesn't like what Homer's doing, in real life, if he really didn't approve of his son achieving his dreams, then he wouldn't have helped him in those very important spots of his journey. And you see that even further whenever all of Homer's equipment gets stolen at the National Science Fair, and John actually uses his power to end the strike, get Homer the equipment that he needs, then Homer goes on to win. So right there, Homer does not win the National Science Fair. He doesn't get the scholarship to college if John doesn't do that for him. It all culminates to the day of Homer's last launch with his friends, whenever he's showing some of his dad's co-workers his medal that he won at the National Science Fair. Throughout the whole movie, Homer's been inspired by Wernher von Braun, who was a very famous NASA scientist back in the day. John makes a comment of, "I heard you met your hero and you didn't even know it," and Homer finally confronts John about how, he's inspired by Wernher von Braun, but the only reason he was successful was because he has attributes of his dad, and that, he's inspired by Wernher von Braun, but von Braun is not his hero. And right there, John finally looks at his son as his own person for the first time, and not just a kid who's dreaming. This is a kid who actually had goals and he met them. He had hurdles that he had to jump, and he did it, and now you see the fruit of his labor right there in a medal. You see it in a scholarship, and John actually is proud of his son for something that he didn't know that he would be proud of him of. Confirms to John that Homer does not resent him as his father. Ultimately, John goes to Homer's final launch. They finally come together. John doesn't have to hide that side of him anymore with his son. Homer hasn't hit his rage with him since the scene in the house whenever they have a little bit of a yelling match. But none of them are holding back their punches anymore for good or bad with one another. And finally, they can acknowledge that it's not just a dream for Homer on both sides. Homer knows that he doesn't have to work at the coal mining town. This isn't just some random dream. And John knows that this isn't just some half-hearted thing that Homer wants to do. This is something that he actually wants to work toward, and he had a hand in helping him. Just because he has those dreams beyond Colwood, it doesn't mean that he looks down on Colwood at all. I just love the relationship between those two characters in this movie, and I think Chris Cooper's performance of John really impacted Jake Gyllenhaal's performance of Homer, which ultimately impacted Jake Gyllenhaal's performance throughout the rest of his career. I kind of want to recall back to an earlier video that I did for The Town. Whenever the main character of that movie, Doug McRae, wanted to get out of Charlestown, it didn't mean that he didn't like the town, and it didn't mean that he looked down on the people in it. It just wasn't for him. And I can kind of apply that to Homer as well. Homer obviously loves his friends there. I mean, his friends were really important to him getting to where he wanted to go. He loves his parents too. He loves his mom. His older brother gets on his nerves, but they have each other's back ultimately. And he shows that he loves his dad as well. And that just because he doesn't want to be a coal miner doesn't mean that he doesn't look up to him. Me editing this, take away the spoiler warning. Those of you who didn't want to hear spoilers, I'm glad that you stayed here. Feel free to go back to that whenever you watch this movie. You can actually watch it on Peacock right now if you're interested. Like I said before, this isn't a perfect movie by any means, but this is a very sentimental movie for me that I enjoy watching on a semi-regular basis, and one that I think a lot of other people would enjoy too. Like I said before, if you haven't seen it before, you can watch it right now on Peacock. That might change depending on whenever you're watching the movie, but as of this drop, it is on Peacock, and I can't recommend it enough. If you're interested in watching the movie and you want to learn more about Homer Hickam, he has several books out there. Like I said before, the book that this movie is based on is called Rocket Boys. Can't recommend it enough. If you're one of my friends, I'll lend it to you. He also has books called The Colwood Way as well as Sky of Stone. All of them are about Colwood. He has other books as well that aren't just about his life story, but his story is just so interesting. Where he started versus where he ended up in life. And so, if you're looking to feel inspired, read more about Homer Hickam, watch the movie. Hickam, his story, this movie based on his life, are all proof that you're committed to a goal, that it's achievable as long as you're willing to put in the work. Nothing's going to be handed to you. Nothing happens overnight. It takes long periods of time, a lot of frustration, a lot of manpower to actually achieve something. But Homer Hickam proves that anything is possible. You could even be born in a coal town and become a NASA scientist one day. Have you seen October Sky? What did you think about it? What's some of your favorite scenes about this movie? What's your favorite Jake Gyllenhaal movie? I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. I had a blast rewatching this movie. Thank you so much for watching this whole video. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again for number 93. Bye, guys.